Alright, I think I have you where I need you. The tripod is just touching the bell. Let me just move it. Alright. So your ring gear and drum assembly. Okay, you want to grab it like this. And then you want to lower it like this with two hands. Okay? But first things first, we have to lubricate that bushing down there and install our bearing. Okay, the bushing, lube the rear of the case and the sealing ring area. Get everything saturated with assembly lube. Alright, on a teardown inspection, you just want to double check that area of the case for the sealing rings. Make sure that there's nothing, nothing cut into the case as far as grooves are concerned. Okay, you can see wear patterns, that's fine, as long as you don't feel anything. If you do feel something and it's, super, super light, you might be able to get away with dealing with it with sandpaper, but I wouldn't use the case if it's any worse than that. And I neglected to put my thick assembly lube on the rollers, so. Alright, and then, this kind of goes without saying, but test fit your hub, your flange here, the journal surface with the new bushing. Make sure it goes in, because if it doesn't, you don't want to find out right now. You want to find out at the time when you can correct it. Alright, make sure it's fully seated onto the bearing, and I'm sorry if I'm hitting the tripod and it's making noise. So what I'm doing is just double checking down here below. I have the governor journal fully exposed, so we seem to be in good shape. Now we're ready to install the clutch into the direct drum. And you're going to install these parts for the final time. So you're going to have your hub, your spacer, your bearing, which is going to go like this, and then of course your clutch pack along with the snap ring. So your spacer, let it settle in, and then your bearing, you want to dunk it in fluid. So if you haven't done that already, just take a couple of seconds to do so. Make sure it's nice and saturated. And then just put it in position. And then you have your hub. Alright, now we'll install our clutch for the final time. And until you get a few frictions in, this will be like kind of wonky. Especially if you're doing it with one hand. And you want to be real careful because that hub does like to get knocked out of position, and when it does, it'll be difficult to get all of the inner teeth of your clutches splined onto it. I mean, it could be a problem. They don't want to fight you. And usually it wins to the extent you got to pull the clutch back out and start again. A lot of carpentry work going on in the background. These folks have projects going here. It's springtime, so maybe they're doing additions, or you know, maybe they're building a, I don't know, something, furniture, whatever. Who knows? All right. Snap ring. I'm sorry, I'm probably obscuring your view, but it is necessary, unfortunately. No other way I can get at it. And that is not in. Alright, I'm gonna actually have to move the camera because I can't really get in there. So let me do that. I'll reseat the snap ring and then we'll come back and then we'll go ahead and air check this clutch to make sure it's functioning. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and air check the direct clutch. I want to make sure it's working. So there's 3 large ports at the back of the case. You're just going to stick your air nozzle in the middle port, and that's where you're going to do your check. All right, sounds good, looks good. We should be good to go. Go ahead, spin the output shaft just to be doubly sure that there's no hang-ups, nothing weird going on inside the case. And then you can proceed with your anti-fretting ring or band stabilizer ring. I just like to put it in the case so that the ends of the ring are kind of opposite of the band anchor pin for the low reverse band. I should say pins, there's 2 of them. Alright, double check your ring, just make sure it's stable and it's where it needs to be. Alright, then go ahead and drop your band on in. Alright, you can check engagement through the low reverse servo bore. Alright, now your planet. So this is where it can get kind of tricky because the planet and the center support's not only heavy, but it's also awkward to handle and deal with. So what I will do is I will first line up my cutout here with my overdrive band anchor pin. Okay, that has to be aligned. Then I'll just kind of grab it like this on the inside and then carefully lower it into the case. Alright, when you insert your drive shaft, it should spin by hand. Okay, with the center support and planet in, just do a quick check around. Make sure that you can access the snap ring groove. Make sure that the center support's not obscuring it. And then the next thing we need to do is install the anti-clunk spring. So you kind of just heard what happens if you leave it out. You have a noisy transmission. So the anti-clunk spring is going to go in this location right here. There's usually a little, I guess, witness mark on the case. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. This one is rather slight. But this is how you install it. Okay, this will be upside down, so it's like this. And it can be a little tricky getting in there, but you just gotta kind of use a little bit of force to get it to go. Okay. I mean, that's how it goes. I don't like it, but, is what it is. Alright, with the anti-clunk spring in position, now you can go ahead and install the center support snap ring. So, what I like to do is I'll have this end here aligned with this lug and this end here on this lug. Alright, just like that. Main thing is you want to make sure that the snap ring is over the anti-clunk spring entirely. And then just check it, make sure that that spring is not going to come out. Because this spring is this is my personal opinion, but it's a horrible design. GM's is vastly superior. You just lay it in there and then you install the center support. But, and I'm talking about for the 4L60Es. So, if this snap ring is not able to fully secure that clunk spring into position like you see it here, then the clunk spring is going to wiggle and come dislodged in its location there, and it's not going to it's not going to stop the clunking, if you will, as the center support rotates in the case, or at least as it wants to rotate when things are happening. Okay, now that we have everything in here, center support in, snap ring in, everything looks good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually turn the case horizontal, belly up, so I can install the overdrive piston assembly. The reason I want to do that is because I want to know absolutely sure, to a 100% certainty, that that band is engaged on that pin when I install the band. Okay? If I install the band and then everything else in the case, rest of the guts, and then the pump, I can't be 100% certain. I can't get eyes directly on my apply pin to be sure that it is engaged on that pin location, that band anchor pin location for the overdrive band. Okay, you mess this up on any of these transmissions, you're not going to have any fourth gear. It'll be neutral in fourth. So you want to make sure that you are absolutely on that band with your servo pin. Alright, we have the case belly up and we have our servo assembly, new seals. It is the B servo, which is the most common variant. Then there is the A servo, which was found in some of the more high performance applications and more heavy duty vehicles, trucks, and the Thunderbird Super Coupe. So if you have access to an A servo, it's recommended that's what you run for anything even remotely performance. But if you don't, there's plenty of aftermarket options as well. So you can run the Sonic servo, that's a good option. If you don't have that, I think there's a couple others. Check Superior Technologies, they may have a servo. I've only used the Sonic servo. Here's the O-ring for the piston itself. I didn't have it in my hand. In the kit you'll have two different O-rings. This O-ring is larger and it's for the A servo. Alright, like anything else, just lube it all up. So I'll just start with the bore. And then lube up the piston pocket and the piston along with your sealing rings for the cover. If you haven't already, you want to make an inspection on the inside of that bore, just to be sure there's nothing wrong with it. Alright, then your return spring, just stick it in there. Alright, the 4R70W and AOD servos, they use a much beefier spring, and so it's a lot more cumbersome to deal with. These are not quite as bad, but you still have to exert some weight and some force and, you know, put in a little effort to get it to seat. Alright, so I use this thing and then I'll put the snap ring, and then I stand on the stand itself, put all my weight so I can get the snap ring in the groove. So I want to try that. You can line it up here if you want, wherever. In fact, I want to see, with the 470Ws, they have a snap ring with hooks on it, so you use internal snap ring pliers. It's also smaller diameter, so it's a little bit easier because this actually sits on top of that snap ring, and then you can force them both down. This, it's not quite as straightforward. And like I said, if you wear gloves, I mean, you're just kind of asking for it. Alright, once it's fully in the bore, at that point you can just keep forcing it and working it inward until the snap ring seats in the groove. Alright, that was a little bit more difficult than it usually is, but of course I'm filming, so anytime I'm filming something, I guarantee you it'll look more awkward, be more difficult, and just take more time than it otherwise would. I guess that's just the nature of the beast. Alright, let's turn this thing back vertical so we can start fitting the rest of the parts in there. Okay, so first thing we're gonna install is gonna be our rear sun gear and associated shaft. So lube up the bushing, both in the sun gear and the planet, because we gotta prep for the installation of the front sun gear and shell. And lube your journal and your splines. Alright, now we have our shell. Okay, it takes 2 bearings. So you'll notice here, this is the I think the last lube mod that I'll discuss. But we have channels cut into these gears. So we have this one, and we have this one. Okay, hurts nothing, only helps. So it's again something else that you want to do to promote the health and longevity of your AOD. Let's lube up that bushing while we're at it. Lube this one up. It's gonna go like that. And this can kind of be a little awkward. You just, you know, want to make sure you're not losing your grip on it. Alright, now is going to be the front bushing. I'm sorry, the front bearing. Bushing, bearing. Get them all mixed up. Okay, now you're going to have your forward clutch hub. sure it spins, turns, make sure there's no issues. Okay, this will freewheel clockwise and lock counterclockwise. Alright, now we're ready for our 2 drums. So if you haven't done so, lube up the bushings in your reverse input drum, and then I'll lube the shaft and the bushing in the forward drum shaft. I refer to that as the input shaft, and the direct drive shaft as well, the direct drive shaft. But, you know, some may refer to it as something else. Alright, all you're basically going to do is ensure that you mesh your lugs on the reverse input drum with those in the sun shell. Other than that, it's not rocket science. And then once you have them aligned, you could just go ahead and wiggle it until everything's meshed with the hub. Alright, we have the band, it's still in the wrapper, so we need to take it out and dunk it in transmission fluid, and then we can install it. Alright, this band's orientation agnostic. All you need to do is just make sure you get it secured onto the band anchor pin in both locations. That's basically it. Gotta go with this one first. Alright, and get it as close as you can. Kind of square it up. And then what you're going to have to do is tap it into position over that pin. Alright, just kind of hold it, do what you can to keep it or held in position. And that's it. Just double check, make sure that you're on, and then make sure everything rotates freely, there's nothing bound up. That's basically it. Okay, now we're ready for our intermediate clutch. So nothing fancy here, you just have your pressure plate, your 3 frictions and your 3 steels, and make note of the front steel. It is selective and it's identified and distinguished by the number here on one of the tabs. 2 is the most common one I mentioned this in another video, I can't remember which one, but I don't ever remember seeing a selective number other than 2 in the ones that I've done. Now, as I've been saying throughout the series, I haven't done a ton of these, so those of you that have done way more than I probably ever will may have seen all the different selectives. So you see this big cutout here in the case? That is where your backing plate or your pressure plate is going to go. Alright, just like that. I made that more difficult than it needed to be, I acknowledge. So these are alto frictions, basically an all alto friction module here. And then we have our number 2, and that's going to face out. You can put that wherever. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to set up a gauge bar, and then we need to measure the depth via the gauge bar to the top of the selective. And based on that depth, we'll look at a chart, and that will tell us where we're at and where we need to be when it comes to the clearance in this pack. So let me go grab that, and then we'll resume. Alright, we're coming to the tail end of case assembly. So I have everything that we need on the bench to perform the next 2 tasks, and I have the ATSG manual that describe these tasks and procedures so that you can follow right along with it. So what you're going to need to do is measure your intermediate clutch clearance as well as your front end play, and the way Ford has you do this is via a depth micrometer and a gauge bar. Okay, so first thing we'll do is measure our intermediate clutch clearance. And what they have you do is take the gauge bar and lay it across the pump deck surface, and then from there you take a micrometer and you measure the depth or distance between the top of the gauge bar and the top of that selective steel plate. And for all V8 applications, you need to have a measurement of 1.634 to 1.636 inches. Okay. For the V6s, you have a little bit more of a latitude, in terms of the range that's acceptable. It's 1.629 to 1.640. Now, there's 3 different selectives available when it comes to this first steel, and they're all numbered 1, 2, and 3, and you can see it on the steel, and you'll see it when we go to do the actual measurement. So if you're either too tight or you're too loose, you can swap in one of those steels. Now, I will say, and I think I've mentioned this in this during the course of this rebuild at some point, but I'll mention it here, and that is an overwhelming majority of the AODs that I've personally done, in fact all of them, I'll say all of them, have had a number 2 selective steel for the intermediate as your front steel. And that leads me to believe that the majority of the transmissions out there have that number 2. In fact, when I went to my hard part supplier yesterday, I was looking for other steels to see if they had any, and they didn't. They had like 5 or 6 number 2 steels on the shelf, and no number 1s and no number 3s. So, and I mean, they're the biggest and only hard part supplier here in town. Anyway, my point is that chances are you'll be okay. Now, the risks come into place when you have to swap the case. If you have to do a case swap and your new case is dimensionally significantly different or materially different than the previous one and had a number 2, then you might be into it for a different selective steel here. So the only way to determine that is via the measurement process. Alright, next, when it comes to the pump, I measure endplay using 2 different methods for this transmission. Okay, I will first measure and determine what selective thrust washer I need following their procedure, and then I'll verify that with an actual end plate check. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your gauge bar and then you're going to measure the depth, but you're not going to measure it to the steel like it's shown here in the picture. You're actually going to measure it on the reverse input drum to pump thrust surface, which is where my finger is. Alright, so before you do any measurements, just clean that surface off, make sure that there's no assembly lube or transmission fluid or anything that might interfere with you getting an accurate measurement. And then once you have your measurement, you're just going to come up to this chart here
and I'll flash it on the screen. It may or may not be real easy to see, just, you know, laying on the bench. But you'll look for your measurement and then the corresponding thrust washer. And we have our thrust washer kit right here. So we have all the different washers that are available for this transmission. Now, if your measurement doesn't fall within any of these ranges, and chances are something's misassembled in the case, and you'll have to go back through and see what happened and, you know, fix it. But beyond that, it's a very straightforward process. Now, if you watch the teardown inspection video for this transmission, at the very beginning, I check endplay, and the endplay that I felt was really tight. And I checked it again informally through the same method using this, you know, pair of vice grips on the input shaft. And when I say input shaft, I mean the shaft that's pressed into the forward drum. It was very tight. Horizontally, you could start to feel endplay at around 12 to 15 thousandths of an inch. So that's what I think my endplay is sitting at. I haven't measured it. I mean, there's no point. I just did another hasty check and to see what kind of endplay I had, to make sure that it was still the same or very similar, and it felt identical to how it felt before I tore the transmission down. And that's another reason why you always want to do that hasty check. You want to get a sense for how much endplay you had prior to taking apart the transmission, so that you can compare it to your check when you go back with it. Because if there's a dramatic difference and you didn't change anything out in terms of like wholesale hard parts exchange, or, you know, replacing the, you know, planets or the drums or the pump or whatever case, then chances are something is amiss inside the case. Either something's installed backwards, something's been left out, you know, something is catching. Either way, you know, it's prudent to go back in and just double check your work. I mean, I know it's a lot of work to do that, but you want to make sure it's right before you give it back to the customer, or, you know, the shop or whomever you're doing the work for, or installing it into your own vehicle if this is a DIY job. All right, the last two things I have on the bench are going to be a little M8 125 bolt. This is just a headless 4L60E pump to case bolt. So when you go to install your pump, you need an alignment dial in this position here. And then I have dial calipers. I don't recommend using these as a substitute for this unless you just simply cannot get a depth micrometer. But if you're going to be working on these transmissions, you are going to be into it for some special tools, including the micrometer and this gauge bar. But if for whatever reason you don't, you just, you know, this is what you have, then you could use that. You just have to be really careful about how you take your measurements and make sure you're getting an accurate reading by doing it multiple times until you're confident that the reading you're getting is the correct one. And even same with the micrometer, but the micrometer, it's a little bit easier to do. All right, I'm going to reposition the camera over the case, and we'll go ahead and we'll measure for our intermediate clutch clearance. And then once we're satisfied with that, if we have to do adjusting, then, you know, we'll do adjusting. But I'm hoping that I won't have to, because I really don't have any other selective steels. It's going to be this or bust. We'll move on to the pump. All right, we have the gauge bar in position, so we're now going to measure for our intermediate clutch clearance. So real quick, before we begin, I'll just run through how to use a micrometer in the event you don't know this, so this way you know. So this micrometer has a resolution of 1/1000th of an inch. Now you can use a more refined micrometer that goes out to 1/10,000th, but it's not really necessary for what we're trying to do here. So you have 3 different scales on this micrometer. Okay, this is going to be your sleeve, this is going to be your spindle. On the sleeve, there's 2 scales. There's going to be a 100,000th of an inch scale, which is represented by the numbers and the large hash marks. And then you have a 25,000th of an inch scale, which is represented by the small hash marks. And then over here is your 1/1000 scale. So we need to be at 1.634 to 1.636. So what we want to do is first go to 1.6, and that'll tell us we're exactly at 1.6. Okay, so everything's lined up. We have the number 6 barely showing. It's right on the hash mark corresponding to the 6. So, and when I say it, I'm referring to the 0 line. So now we want to go another 25 thousandths deeper. So we want to come all the way around so that we're on the 0 line on that first small hash mark. Then we want to go another 10 thousandths, and this will give us 1.635. All right, so if you want, you can lock this down just as it is, right in the middle, 1.635 an inch. And so what the ATSG manual has you do is apply a little bit of downward pressure. Alright, so I see that even with downward pressure I'm still a little bit too deep, so I'm going to back it off until my micrometer base is flush on the gauge bar, and then I'll lock it down. So this is telling me 1.633 and a half. Okay, you can double check it by doing a measurement one more time. Just back off the spindle and then seat it. Again, with a little bit of downward pressure. And it looks like I measured 1.631. 3 thousandths, by the way, is not going to kill you. So if that ends up being like what we ultimately conclude is our depth, it's not going to hurt you. Okay, a little bit more pressure yields 1.63, I guess 1.6315 or 14. Alright, now we'll go to the opposite side. And we'll basically repeat the same process. Alright, this is giving us just shy of 1.633. So it looks like we're at 1.632. 33435. Yep, 1.632. So sometimes you're not going to be exactly at 1.634 to 1.636. Now, if we were about any more than, I would say, 5 thousandths off, then that would concern me. I would have to look for another selective steel. But we're in the neighborhood that we need to be. The other thing to keep in mind is that clutch clearances will open up a little bit once the transmission's back in the vehicle and all of the clutch packs had a chance to break in and start working again. So it's not the end of the world if you're 1 to 2 thou, maybe 3 thou off. Any more than that though, I'd probably look to make an adjustment. So like I said, the number 2 selective flat steel is by far the most common, at least the ones that I've seen. However, in the event you're way off, you're going to either A, need to acquire one of those other 2 steels, or B, possibly machine the backing plate or the apply plate. So that's intermediate frictions, intermediate clutch pack. So now we'll go ahead and move on to the pump. Alright, we have our gauge bar back in position. This time we're going to use this hole right here for our depth micrometer. So the minimal depth here that you're going to see is 1.438 inches. And the maximum depth that you would see is going to be 1.568 inches. So if you're outside that range, then something is amiss in the case, or something's wrong. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my micrometer to read 1.5 inches and just start from there. Okay, right now we're at 1.5. And here, instead of applying downward pressure, all you want to do is make sure that you're flush with the gauge bar surface when you make contact with the reverse input drum. Okay, so looks like we are just shy of 1.525, so 1.522, and that would correspond to a natural colored thrust washer, which is between 85 and 89 thousandths of an inch. All right, so we'll take one more measurement just to, make sure that we're consistent. Lock it down. So 1.522. All right, so now we want to measure roughly 180 degrees out. Just flip the gauge bar and repeat the process. I will say this will yield a tight end play. How tight, we don't know yet, but it'll be tight. Okay, it looks like we're 1.526. So we'll measure again. Uh, 1.525, or I'm just shy of it. Okay, so every measurement that we've had indicates that we are to use a natural colored thrust washer. So the thrust washer that came out of here is 88 thousandths thick, and I guess that meets the definition of natural according to the ATSG manual. So that's what we're going to use, that's what we're going to install. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a gasket here, and then I'm going to install the pump. And we're just going to take a hasty reading. I'm going to install a couple of pump bolts, maybe, let's see, here, here, and here. So that'll make 3. And that will give us an idea of what kind of end play we have. And per the ATSG manual, if we have any end play at all, as long as it's there, then we're good. So that's what we'll do. Okay, first things first, go ahead and install your alignment pin. It's going to be at the 12 o'clock position. And then your gasket. And you could use more than one pin if you want. I mean, I'm just using one, but it's up to you. Alright, next. Just line your clutch circuits up here on the pump with those on the case. And then carefully lower the pump into position. Alright, one thing that I'll point out when you're doing this, when the O-ring's off, is you're going to have a little bit of force working against you from underneath. Okay, that's going to be your intermediate clutch return spring. It's going to come in contact with the top steel plate there. Okay, that's normal. Like I said, you can install the bolts if you want, or you can just install
2 or 3. I'm going to install all but that top one. So 10 millimeters. All right, then we're gonna just install our small pair of vice grips. Try to get it so that they're not interfering with the case. All right, and then we're gonna see if we have any end play at all. So you can turn it, make sure it turns freely. If not, if you're bound up, I mean, that's an indicator of a problem. Okay, we have some end play. So I'm going to install a base so we can put our dial indicator, and I'm actually going to take a physical or actual measurement of end play. Alright, dial indicator is in position on the input shaft, so now we're going to pull up on it with the vice grips and see what kind of measurement we have for end play. So it's given about 17 thousandths of an inch. You can run these tight, even if this, comes down to about maybe 10 to 11 thousandths. I mean, that's fine. In George Reed's Building AODs, here I'm referring to a book, he likes to see between 40 and 70 thousandths of end play. That does conflict with what the ATSG manual tells you, at least insofar as indirectly where you need to be by virtue of taking measurements. But when this came in, there was no damage in the case that would lead me to believe that there was an end play problem, and it was very tight. So essentially, if you follow the ATSG's method, which I also believe is Ford's method, if it fits, it ships. I mean, that's kind of how I would characterize it, in terms of what to do. So we're getting 17 thousandths, probably going to shrink to about 10 to 12 thousandths once we, install the pump for the final time and torque all the bolts down to spec. But, as long as we're not negative and we put the correct thrust washer in place for the measurements we have, we should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and take the pump out. We'll lather everything up, and we'll install the gasket and the pump for the final time and do one more check. Alright, go ahead and lube up your pump bore. I apologize for the noise. Some guys are out there doing some work, so landscaping and whatnot. They got that stupid blower going. Yeah, you can lather everything up, doesn't matter. Lather up your journal surfaces. Just basically make it all good. And just go ahead and reinstall your alignment dowel. And then your pump the case gasket. Okay, just make sure all your bowl holes are exposed where they need to be. And everything's good. Alright, next put on your pump O-ring. And the pump O-ring will have the yellow stripe facing out. Okay, so yellow stripe out. Make sure it's fully in the groove, check it all the way around. Make sure your thrust washer is installed. Lube everything up like you need to. Or as you need to, I should say. Or like as. Same difference, I guess. And then carefully lower the pump into position. And then go ahead and thread in a few bolts. You should be able to just, force the pump in by hand. So I like to get a few threads going for each of these bolts before I seat it, just so I know that I won't have any issues when I go to torque it up. Actually, I'm going to leave that one in there for now. Alright, this alignment dowel should thread out nice and easy. It should not be bound up or stuck. If it is, you'll just want to loosen all your other bolts. Maybe use like a Phillips head screwdriver and manipulate the pump a little bit so that it frees it up. Alright, 15 to 20 foot-pounds is your torque value. It's actually 16, I apologize, 16 to 20 foot-pounds. So we'll go 16. And you're gonna have to use an extension. And I'm just gonna kind of work them out. Get them started. And again, apologize for the noise. I would put this off if I could, but I can't. And this thing has to be done today. All right, I'm going to reposition the indicator. Alright, we're going to yank up on it and see where we are at. Make sure you're zeroed. Okay, somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 23 thousandths. I think I'm at 20 on the nose. There's 22. Back to 0. 21. 20. Like I said, and this thing's drifting off the front of the shaft a little bit, but I'm satisfied. This is good end play. You know, like I said, there's a little bit of a disparity between what you see in George Reed's building and modifying AOD transmissions or AOD 470 transmissions and what you see in the ATSG manual when it comes to end play. I'm going to defer to what the ATSG manual goes, or you know what they tell you, and you know, we're going to call this good. So, all right, we're going to turn the case back again, belly up. We'll go ahead and install our accumulator pistons and springs along with the low reverse servo, and I'll walk you through on exactly what you need to do there to validate the length of your pin is correct. All right, with the case belly up, first thing I want to do is actually install the low reverse servo. So I'm going to walk you through the process of checking and validating the length of your servo pin is correct using the special tool. The special tool in question is going to be OTC T80L-77050-A. And I'm just going to show you this just to show it to you, but if you don't have this tool and you're not doing any major part swap, like case specifically, chances are you won't need it. So anyway, I'm going to change the battery out and then we'll walk you through the process and procedure. All right, so first things first, lube up your bore. And if you haven't done so already, double check, make sure that your band anchor engagement point's accessible. Okay, if it's not, then you're gonna have to do other things to get it accessible, because that would mean that the band rotated somehow, some way, and you know, that could lead you to go back into the case to fix it. That's never happened to me, so as long as you get it right when you initially install it, you should be fine. All right, as mentioned, we have two different servos here on the bench. We have what we'll call a 2-groove and a 3-groove. And a 3-groove servo came out of here, so that's what we're going to install back in first. So what you need to do is install your servo and your spring, but you do not install the cover of the snap ring. Okay? Next, you're going to install your tool. Just position it over the servo and get it down so you can secure it in the groove. And it can be tricky, it'll want to fight you, because I wasn't in the groove initially, but now I am. Okay, just double check, make sure you're in the groove in both locations. Then you're gonna torque this little forcing screw down to 50 inch-pounds, not 30 inch-pounds, let's say 30 inch-pounds, 50 inch-pounds. So 50 inch-pounds. All right. Now we're going to position a dial indicator on the top of the piston. Okay, the crown, if you will, or wherever you can find a flat surface. And the way I've put this, I'm going to have to spin the whole case around so you can see the indicator. Alright, indicator's in position, it's zeroed, so what we're going to do is we're going to take loose the screw until it bottoms out on the underside of the tool. So in other words, the servo has to travel up until it hits the underside of the tool, and if the distance is between 112 and 237 thousandths of an inch, then this particular piston with this pin length is the correct pin length for this application, for this case. If not, then, well, we'll have to swap in another piston and recheck. Okay, so at 0, and we need to keep track of our movement. And I just moved it. Let's reset. There's 10 thousandths, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 10. So past our minimum spec, and we're at 118 thousandths. So 118 thousandths of an inch puts us right at minimum spec. I do feel a little bit of drag on the band, so I want to double check this. So we'll go back to 50 inch-pounds. Almost there. Okay, so it looks like we went below 0 a little bit. We'll re-zero, and then we'll back out the bolt and see where we are at. $10, $20, 30, 50, 80, minimum spec. So looks like 121. Alright, so what this tool does is it more or less replicates the presence of a cover on the case with the servo. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tool away, take the dial indicator off, and then I'm going to compare the drag that I have now with the drag that exists with, you know, nothing in this bore. And when you do this, you just want to be careful so that the tool doesn't get caught up on the groove and accidentally, you know, wreck it or something. Alright, so we were at 120 thousandths worth of travel. And that feels about the same. So now I'm curious. I'm going to go ahead and grab my other piston with 2 grooves, and I'm just curious to see where we are at. Alright, sorry about that focus. So we're going to lube up this piston, and I'm curious to see if we'd still be within spec with the 2 groove piston. 2 groove pin, I should say. And I'm awfully close with this dial indicator and forcing screw. Hopefully I can get my torque wrench in there. If not, I'll have to move it. Alright, should be alright. Should be good. Alright, time to back it out. Make sure we're at 0. And let's see what kind of measurement we end up with. Alright, time to back it off and see what kind of measurement we have. $10, $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $80, $90, $100 thousands, $120, $130, $40, $50. So 170 thousandths. Alright, no difference in drag, so basically either of these two servo pins will work, but because I want a robust engagement into reverse, meaning there's no chance of slippage, I'm going to install the 3 groove pin for the final time, and that'll be the servo we go with. Alright, let me clear all this stuff out, and then we'll go ahead and resume with the installation of the servo, and then we'll move on to the 2 accumulators. And then from there I'll install the linkage, valve body, filter, pan, and basically done. I still have to do the extension housing, but that'll be basically the last thing I do other than the neutral safety switch. Alright, go and find your 3 groove servo. Install it if you need to, just put a little bit more assembly lube. And then your cover is next. Okay, this is the side that faces you. This is the underside. Lube that up. Okay, just make sure that it will go into the bore. And then I used this tool earlier to install the Overdrive servo and cover. This is Kenmore J35739-3. I have no idea what it's actually used for, what it was designed to service, but it works great for what I'm trying to do here. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm going to seat it here. This basically gives me a little bit more leverage. And then I'm just going to stand on the stand itself and try to get this snap ring in a position where it's advantageous for me to install it. Just gonna press down. And my goal here is to just try to get this snap ring in the groove, just start it in the groove. I'm sorry, in the bore. I mean, I guess the groove too, but the bore is my main focus, getting it in there. And it can be difficult. I don't know if there's special tools for this either, to be perfectly honest with you. So come in with it. Try to work it to get it started. And I was actually right when I said in the groove. And it's not fully in yet. Now it is. Check it. And you're done. I mean, even as sloppy of an install as that was, it still makes quick work of the snap ring, that tool. If you don't have that tool, just use a socket of an appropriate size. You know, if you got something real big, you know, 30 millimeter or something, that could work too. All right, next is accumulators. So here we're going to install some components from the Transgo shift kit. So for your fourth accumulator, which is going to go in this bore here, they have you install a large spring between the piston and the cover. So like this. And what this spring does is it holds this piston in place. Okay. Now when you pull this out of the bore, you know, disassembly, almost always this piston is right up flush against the snap ring, which is where it should be. But sometimes it'll drift a little bit lower into the bore, or deeper into the bore I should say, and potentially cut off the feed passage. So what this spring does is it prevents that from happening. And then for your 2-3 accumulator, they give you a green spring to install inside the main spring. And that's going to go in here. They also give you a washer to install for the Overdrive servo. I actually didn't install that, so I may end up taking this out to do so. To be perfectly honest with you, I completely spaced on it. Alright, so you're going to have 2 sealing rings for your 3-4 accumulator. You're going to have the scarf cut Teflon ring for the piston that goes on the base of it. And then you're going to have the rubber O-ring here, the square cut ring that goes on the cover itself. So like all scarf cut rings, you want to pre-wind. Just pre-wind it nice and good. You want it to hug that groove. And just go ahead and put a little bit of green assembly lube where the ends meet, and then lube up everything else with blue assembly lube. I mean, you could use blue assembly lube too here, or whatever color your assembly lube happens to be. If you use trans gel, you know, I think they come in red, yellow, and I think 1 or 2 other colors, but I'm not sure. Here's our O-ring for our cover. Again, same deal, just make sure it's installed all the way around. Make sure it's not twisted up or whatever. Common sense stuff. Alright, then your spring. Alright, then you're going to have your cover. And this might be upside down. I don't know. I don't think they're side specific, or, you know, the orientation matters, but I could see the wear pattern from the snap ring. So I'm just gonna reinstall it correctly, and then let me get snap ring pliers. Alright, try to seat it just by pressing down on it if you can. You may need to tap on it with a hammer and a socket. Just grab your snap ring pliers. And install it. Now, like I said, you want to make sure this is flush up against the snap ring. Just put a little air, and that allows you to air check it and get it secured where it needs to be at the same time. Okay, last accumulator is going to be our 2-3, so lube your bore. And you always want to install a 4R70W bonded steel and rubber accumulator piston. You don't want to reuse the plastic or the aluminum pistons that come in these AODs from the factory. I mean, bonded steel and rubber is just better overall for things like this. Stick it in there, put your 2 springs, and then the side with the dimple is going to face inboard. It's basically your spring stop or spring seat. And then same deal, just go at it with your snap ring pliers. Pretty easy deal. Okay, I'm going to move the camera a little bit so we can install the shift linkage, and then we're going to go take the governor apart, clean that out, and then we'll install the governor on the back of the trans. Alright, I got everything that you need to install your parking linkage, including your selector shaft, your throttle cable and the valve lever, and then your rooster comb and parking rod assembly. So you have 2 seals that have to be replaced. There's going to be one in the case itself, and then there's going to be one in the selector shaft. So both fairly easy to replace, no big deal. The only other thing you don't see on here because it's real small is the little roll pin that secures the selector shaft in place. Alright, so I'll go and install the selector shaft seal. So what you want to do is just get it as square in the bore as you possibly can. And then Ford makes a tool specifically designed to install this seal. Unfortunately, I think the tool ID number is worn off. But if I find it, I'll annotate the video. But a bushing driver or a socket will also work just fine. Okay, make sure it's good. And then we'll go ahead and put some assembly lube just to protect it. Alright, next on I just gather all these small parts, get them back on the bench so they don't fall into the case. Alright, now go ahead and assemble your rooster comb and parking rod. So it just goes like this. And then you want to position it so that the very end of the rooster comb makes contact here, because this is where it's going to rest when the vehicle's in park. And if you want, you can actually position it so that it's where it needs to go. Alright, the next thing I need to do is pull this little seal out and install a new one. Just take a screwdriver and wedge it out. Alright, I'm going to clean up the inside of this thing a little bit, and then I'll put the new seal in. There's just a little bit of brake cleaner and shop towel. I mean, that's all you really need to do. So let me do that and then I'll resume. Alright, then the rest of your linkage is going to look just like this. So you have your selector shaft, you have your throttle shaft, or throttle valve shaft, and then you have your selector to rooster comb nut, which is 21 millimeter. So you're going to have to install everything from the back first. So first install your throttle shaft, and then you want to have your nut in position just like this, and then you install your selector shaft. Okay. Once you have everything engaged on the rooster comb properly, just cinch down your nut, and then make sure that your spring is in the right location and this is in the right orientation. Okay. It's going to face kind of like this. And then from there, you can, once you're satisfied with everything, you can test the parking linkage and then go ahead and seat your roll pin. Alright, I already installed the little selector shaft seal itself, 7/16 socket, and just make sure it's fully seated all the way in the bore there. Alright, I'm going to leave the spring off for now, so we'll just come in with our throttle lever, and then, like I said, make sure that you have your nut in here. And then from there, we'll grab our selector, just kind of work it in. And I'm just going to thread the nut on just a little bit just to get it started. Let's get it on the flats of the get the rooster comb, I should say, on the flats of the selector shaft. And then you can turn that right side up and then go ahead and install your spring. And then I'm just going to test the linkage. Appears to work. Okay, so I'm good there. Alright, I'm going to back the throttle linkage off just enough so that I can get it, the nut, with a 21 millimeter wrench. And there is a spec for this. I don't know offhand what it is. I'll give it to you in a second. It's in the manual, but you just want to cinch it down good and tight so it doesn't come loose. And then position your spring. So that it's secured on the throttle shaft. All right, the only thing left to do now is install the little roll pin. Okay, it should go right in there. All right, that's tight. It's not going to come loose. All right, with the selector shaft installed, what I'm going to now do is I'm going to lube up the worm tracks a little bit. We're going to install the case gasket, so basically separator plate to case. And then I'm going to install a test plate so that we can air check the entire case. And I just realized I have to install the governor, so I'm going to install the governor as well. I haven't disassembled or cleaned it yet, but we'll do that afterwards. All right, the little T that you see here, I mean, it's upside down from your vantage point, but it's for Transgo. This is a Transgo gasket. So came in the shift kit. This is what they want you to use. So that's what we'll use. All right, here's the test plate. It's an OTC Ford tool. The number is T82L7006-A. It looks a bit dirty, so let me spruce it up and then we'll put it on. Okay, test plate's been attached, so let's go ahead and begin the air check. We'll start with the forward clutch and just work our way through all the rest of the circuits until we're done. Okay, I don't have a perfect seal. In fact, let me grab my rubber nipple here. Okay, all the air you're hearing is coming out of the back of this. That's why I didn't have it on initially. Okay, forward sounds good, so we'll go to the intermediate. And we're going to need the nipple for that. So that bolt's in the way. And bolt's still interfering with it. But you have good apply regardless. Okay, direct clutch is going to be back here. Alright, remember the clearance in the direct clutch was only something like 30 thousandths, 35 thousandths. So when it does come on, it should be a relatively, not soft shift, but it should be a crisp shift, but otherwise smooth. All right, now we're going to do our overdrive band servo. So here's apply.
Okay, and then release. So we want to make sure that the band, we could feel it. So I'm going to stick my finger on it. I can feel that band apply. Alright, that's nice and robust. So I don't think I'm going to take that servo cover off. I think we're good. So next we'll do the low reverse servo. Again, same deal. Nice, good apply. 3/4 accumulator. Okay, just like that. 2/3. It's gonna be right here. Okay, I could feel the 2/3 putting spring pressure on the back of that cover plate. And that's all you're looking for. So governor of the valve body. So you have this little valve right here. Like I said, I haven't taken this thing apart. Not yet anyway. As soon as this thing comes, as soon as we're done with the air check, I'm going to do that. Align the governor. And let's see, anything else? And we tested the intermediate. Reverse input. Alright, so that's how you validate that all of your case assembly work was done correctly and that all your clutches will apply. Alright, now we're ready to install the valve body onto the case. So we're almost there at the home stretch. So one minor piece of business to attend to first is going to be our rear case governor filter screen right here. So if you're disassembling one of these things and that screen suddenly appears on the bench after you take the valve body and gaskets off, and you have no idea where it came from, you're wondering, this is where it came from. And it just slides in there. It doesn't slip fit where it's held in place, so when you tilt the case over, it's going to come out. Okay, so this has the Transgo shift kit. And so we have two Z-bolt locations that we want to be mindful of because we're going to install the 2 bolts that have the threads that terminate halfway up and the rest of it is smooth. I know there's a better way to say that, but just want to get the point across. And in the Transgo shift kit, they have you install this little cotter pin here, and it's basically intended to, I guess, hold the gasket in place. I'll be honest, I'm not all that crazy about it, but just for the sake of being thorough, I installed it. So when you install the valve body, you need to do 2 things. You need to make sure that your manual valve is engaged, and you also need to make sure that your throttle valve linkage arm is engaged. Okay, you do those 2 things, you'll be good to go. Okay, so your Z-bolt locations, basically here and here. Actually, here and here. Now, if you didn't have that cotter pin in, you would just simply install your case gasket, smear a whole bunch of assembly lube onto the case belly and the worm tracks, and you'd be good to go. Alright, so you got a multitude of long bolts, and then you have 6 remaining shorter bolts. So a short bolt will go here.
And the rest of them are going to go on the perimeter. You have real short bolts for the filter, but we'll get to those later. Okay, these are all 8mm. And all I'm doing is just starting them. You don't want to cinch them down just yet. Alright, we'll gather up the rest of our bolts. And our D10 roller. Your D10 roller is going to go right there. That bolt that went through the valve body basically acts as a little locating stud, if you will. I don't know why that was difficult. End of the day, it's Friday afternoon. So this is technically going to be a Friday afternoon transmission, but we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that it's not your typical Friday afternoon transmission. So, all in all, these transmissions can be finicky. I mean, especially if you're not used to them or you're not super familiar with them. You don't have a ton of reps on them. And I would put myself in that boat because I don't really do these all that much. So, the main thing that you need to be aware of, actually two things. One is the lip seals, and in the case of reverse input drum, the square cut seals on the pistons. If you don't have the special lip seal protector tools, it's going to be damn near impossible to go back with this thing, at least do it the right way. A lot of folks that don't have those tools, they'll just simply not replace the lip seals and or reverse input piston square cut seals. Because, and I know this from prior experience, it's very, very easy to tear, cut, or destroy those seals if you try to force the piston into the, into its bore. So, anyway, the second thing that you need to be mindful of is bushings. Okay, the AOD is hard on bushings. So, more than likely you're going to have to replace the bushings. I mean, it's pretty much guaranteed at this point anyway, given, I mean, we're talking 1980 was their first year, so they're like 43 years old at this point, 44 years old. So, anyway, I'll do a separate video on all the special tools, but there is quite a few of them. And as I mentioned in the valve body video, if you didn't watch that, you'll hear it here as well. I liken this to GM's 204R. They're kind of similar in the respect that they're very finicky. Neither is nearly as intuitive or straightforward as a 700R Ford. And both of them require a lot more special tools than that transmission. So 700R Fords, 4L60Es, I mean, as far as the 4-speed overdrives, if I was teaching somebody how to build, transmissions and that's where I wanted to start them, it would be on a 700R4 and a 4L60E. If I wanted to focus on the overdrive stuff onward. If I wanted to, we'll do this bolt last, if I wanted to start somebody just in general in transmissions, it would be a C6 and then a 727 and a TH350. I mean, they're all very intuitive, very straightforward, very simple transmissions. They don't require a ton of special tools. But something like the 204R and the AOD would be like, that would come later once they're well versed and comfortable working on some other units. Okay, we're going to do 100 inch-pounds. And you don't need to work up in terms of torque. In the valve body video, I wasn't sure, I'll annotate it, but you don't need to do any kind of workup. It's just go right to torque and you'll be good. Main thing is you don't want to over torque these bolts. ATSG tells you 90 to 120 inch-pounds. I've always done 100. I've never had issues. And there's no particular tightening sequence either that I know of. I'm just following the same sequence I always do with things like this. I just start in the center and work my way out. So just be careful, you know, be deliberate. You know, upon teardown inspection, once the case was clean, you wanted to check your threads in your case, make sure that none were close to stripping out. I think I already got that bolt. And the other thing is you want to make sure that your torque wrenches are calibrated. This one's actually due for it. So just popped into my mind thinking, oh, when was the last time I had this calibrated and when is it due? And it's due. So this is a 1989 AOD unit. And so these valve bodies underwent three major changes through the AOD's life cycle from 1980 to 1989. And the E9 valve bodies, which is what this is, and it, you know, refers to the first character and the second character in the casting codification. So with Ford, at least up until the late 90s, early 2000s, they used a letter, a number, and two more letters in all of their casting, casting numbers. And the first letter corresponded to the decade of production, starting with C for 1960s, D for the 70s, E for the 80s, F for the 90s. And then the number would be the year of production, and then the next character, which would be a letter, would be the application, and then the last letter, at least in the first four, there's several others, but they're not as important. The last character, which is going to be a letter, indicates the office in Ford Motor Company, or department, if you will, that was responsible for designing, engineering, and producing the part. So in this valve body, I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but it's going to say RF, which I believe stands for Rouge Foundry, and then E is in Edward, 9 Alpha Papa. So, or Echo, I should say, Echo 9 Alpha Papa. And so this would be 1989, and A is the application, which offhand I have not memorized that. But P is the automatic transmission and transaxle group within Ford Motor Company. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check every single one of these bolts going, you know, just down the line until I've hit all of them. Lest I miss one. And believe it or not, I have missed them, even in videos. I missed one. I'm not going to tell you which one. You'll have to go and watch all the videos for you to know. But there is one out there that I literally missed. I caught it when I was doing the editing before the trans went out the door. But it's not good. You don't want to miss that stuff. Alright, now when you go to retorque, sometimes it will take some additional, movement, and that's because the gasket's just simply compressing. Now, these paper composite gaskets, they have a tiny, infinitesimally small amount of trapped air, but it's enough to make a difference when you're working the wrench. So, don't be alarmed if it travels a little bit more before you hit torque again. See, right there in that corner, I missed one. And here's another one. Perfect example. I mean, I didn't officially say I was done, but I kind of acted like it. So, like I said, Friday afternoon, you gotta be watchful. All right, I think I hit all of them now. So we can grab the filter. So you're going to have a small little cork gasket. It's just going to go right here. And then you're going to have the filter itself. And then you have your grommet. So I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube, both on the grommet as well as on the little pickup gasket. So 3 volts. Eight millimeter and same torque. Alright, filter's on. So now we got to go and grab our pan and our gasket. And this thing came in without a magnet, and I thought I had another donut magnet, but I don't. But I do have a square magnet. So regardless of whether you use a donut, a square, a starfish, whatever, always have a magnet. Doesn't matter how it's shaped or what it looks like, as long as it's there. So these bolts get anywhere from 6 to 10 foot-pounds according to the manual. So we can keep it at 100 and that'll work fine. Don't ask me what that is in the background. I have no idea. All right, 10 millimeters on all these bolts. Okay, as far as sequence here, it's up to you, but I usually start on the sides and then work my way to the ends. You can start on the ends and work your way to the sides as well, it doesn't matter. And I will kind of sneak up on these, and this is true of all pan bolts. I mean, I've seen or had happen to me, bolts strip the threads out when I went right to torque, even though they looked fine visually. You never know with these older units, you know, what they've been through and who's worked on them. I mean, it's kind of always a risk, you know, one of the many hazards of dealing with transmissions or really any small fasteners. But I guess the one saving grace is a lot of people don't maintain their transmission. They don't drop the pan nearly as often as they should. So I guess it's less of an opportunity to strip threads out. And kind of a cynical way to think about it, but it's true. I kind of don't like the way these feel. I may actually back the torque down. No, that made it. Typically, you need a minimum of 70 to 80 inch-pounds on all these bolts to prevent leaks. Like, that's like a minimum. I mean, you may get away with a little less on a bolt here or there, but on average, that's what you need, at least from what I've seen in my own experience. The other thing too is this gasket will collapse. I mean, there's a lot of compression that has to happen, so it'll feel like the threads are giving on you in you know, some cases, but as long as you're slow and deliberate, you won't strip them out unless they're just already gone. And that's when you want to make sure you check that stuff on disassembly. I mean, like I said, it's not foolproof. There's going to be times where, you know, if you work on transmissions enough, threads that look physically fine will strip on you and you got to take the pan off and do a helicoil. And that's not fun. I hate helicoil repair. I will likely never do a video on it because I just hate doing them. And if you feel your thread about to give way and you have, you know, a digital torque wrench like this, if you're beyond 75 inch-pounds, just stop. You know, even at 70, it's not going to leak. All right, pan's on. So we have two more steps to take. One is the extension housing, and the last, very last act of this transmission's assembly is to install that neutral safety / reverse backup light switch. All right, I'm gonna reposition the camera. We'll get the extension housing on. I actually had to put the housing on just with a couple of bolts so I can smack that seal out, put a new bushing in it, put a seal in it, and then we'll proceed with, you know, finishing this thing up and getting it on the bench and calling it good and done. All right, we're almost done with this thing. So just real quick on the bushing, the extension housing, there's going to be an oil slot or oil groove cut into the bushing there, or machined I should say. You just want to make sure that that's lined up with this slotted groove in the housing itself. All right, other than that, you just pound it in. I'll lube up the bushing, then I'm going to install the seal, and then we'll put this thing on with the gasket, and that'll be it for the extension housing. Okay, as far as a seal installation tool, I know that Ford through OTC makes specialty tools, but you don't really need them. Just any old bushing driver will do as long as it's big enough. Alright, as I mentioned on numerous occasions throughout the series, this transmission was either rebuilt or refreshed sometime back in... Oh, sorry about that. This transmission was rebuilt or refreshed sometime back in 2022. The converter had, I think, a date of 9/something/22. So I don't know if the customer actually paid for. I don't know if the customer actually paid for a refresh or a rebuild. If he paid for a refresh, then he got a refresh. I mean, the frictions and the overdrive band were replaced. But if he paid for a complete and total overhaul, then I would say he did not get what he paid for, because this thing was not overhauled completely as it should have been. I mean, all the bushings, other than maybe the pump bushing, were not replaced. They were original. And so, I mean, that kind of sucks, because, you know, you're paying X dollars for this stuff to be done, and, you know, none of it's getting done. But, you know, on teardown inspection, we found, in addition to none of the bushings being replaced, no valve body or shift kit was installed, or no modifications that would have been prudent to do. The direct clutch had a ridiculous amount of clearance in it. This thing wants to fight me. I don't know what its problem is here. It should just go on and be done. But anyway, yeah, none of the bushings were replaced. None of the stuff you would normally do with these things. I mean, he did install a 4R70 T3 accumulator, but you know, the reverse band was reused. The planet was no good. The rear sun gear was no good. I mean, they were chipping and, you know, heavily worn. So anyway, that's kind of the deal there. Sometimes, unfortunately, you don't get what you paid for. But again, that's with the assumption that he paid for a full overhaul. I don't know that. But having the direct clutch having as much clearance as it had, I mean, that certainly could have explained our neutral and third by itself potentially. Having the governor, you know, beat up the way it was, at least you know, little little slivers of aluminum in there from the inner bore. I mean, I don't know what went on there, but you know, I'm hoping it's fixed. I mean, the valves are now moving freely as they should, but you know, I think it'll be okay. It didn't seem to be any damage to the main part of the bore. It was just that very, you know, kind of entryway area into that secondary bore. So we'll see. Now, valve body, the throttle valve, throttle control valve had, like, you know, real issue with dragging and binding. So polished the board to the point where it was moving freely again. So hopefully that self-resolves as well, in the sense that we don't have any problems with line pressure or line pressure rise in the unit once it goes back in. You always want to verify your pressures so that you know, any TV-based transmission, throttle valve-based transmission, your 700R4s, your 204Rs, and this one, you always want to make sure that you verify your cable geometry and adjustment with a pressure test, because if you don't, then you're kind of shooting in the dark. And if you have shift or drivability symptoms and problems, then you don't know what your data is telling you about line pressure conditions inside the unit. So, all right, I'm gonna move the stand around a little bit so we can install that neutral safety switch, and then we'll wrap up. All right, I just put a little bit of assembly lube on the O-ring, and then all you're going to do is thread it in. And I think this thing is 3/4. Believe it or not, they make a special socket for these two. Of course, I don't have it. Don't need it. Just get it good and tight. German method is always reliable when it comes to stuff like that. All right, this thing's finally done. So, received a complete and total overhaul. Basically a stock plus build, or a stock to mild performance build. Has an Alto power pack in the direct clutch, all new bushings, Transgo shift kit. We installed an Alto heavy duty band for the overdrive. Shimmed the overdrive piston, so the overall band clearance is less, but it's, you know, still acceptable, which means we're going to have better engagement from 3 to 4. We have basically minimum spec clearance in the reverse input. We were at like 40 thousandths or so, maybe 38 to 40. That should be okay. You know, this transmission came out with that clearance in that drum, and there was no, you know, concerns when it came to reverse, or, you know, nothing weird going on in the gears that it did have in terms of its forward pattern shifting. So what else? High energies in the forward and the reverse input. The intermediate got the standard Alto clutches, which are great clutches, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, you're not going to have issues. So, all in all, it was a little bumpy at times because of the, you know, just the typical stuff you have to deal with when installing the lip seals, and in the case of reverse input drum, the square cut seals to get those pistons to seat in their respective bores. The intermediate clutch was really the only one that went nice and smooth. End play was at 20 thousandths in the front, that's fine. The clearance in the intermediate was a little on the tight side as well, but again, like all clutch packs, it'll open up by a few thou, and we were only a few thou off. So, all right, well, I think that about does it. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. If there's anything else you want to see on the AOD or this family of transmissions, post it in there, and I'll see if I can make a video on it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. As always, enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and we'll catch you on the next video.